answering the question, usually in a job interview, why did you leave your last job? Okay, this is something that is a standard job interview question. There's about 10 standard job interview questions that are, a lot of them are traditional. Things like, tell me about yourself. What are your weaknesses? What are your salary expectations? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? A question about the future. Where do you see yourself? This is a question about the past. Why did you leave your last job? Okay. Now, like a lot of these questions, it's kind of a trick. Okay. It's a minefield. The reason they ask you these questions is twofold. One, to learn a bit about you, see if you have some of the requirements. But two, also to detect any possible red flags with you. Okay, so it's a little bit of a trap. They might be asking you this to see if you're going to say anything that they'll consider a red flag, which results in you pretty much eliminating yourself. Okay, like the salary question. What are your salary expectations? And you say what you really think, some nice high number, and then little do you realize you just eliminated yourself, right? So this question is like that. It's a trap, okay? Now, the problem is that people can have left their last job for several different reasons. So you've got to consider each of these scenarios in turn, how you would respond to this question, depending on what your deal is. Okay. The first thing you need to understand about this question is that it's a bad question to be asked. Okay. So number one, watch out. Number two, try not to spend half an hour on this question, right? This question is about avoiding pitfalls. It's not about selling yourself and showing how awesome you are, right? Like, for example, when they say, what are your weaknesses? You want to be very careful how you answer that because it's about avoiding a trap. It's not really the platform you need to like sell yourself, That would be more of a question like, what are your strengths? Then you say, let me tell you, and then you make a real case for yourself. So this one is a bad question. You want to answer it and get the hell off this question so you can spend your time in the interview talking about how you're awesome and not minimizing, like doing damage control. Okay. What they're looking for here, a big part of this question is they're trying to detect a red flag. And the red flag is, are you the type of person that will badmouth somebody else? Okay. Are you going to say negative things about somebody else? If the answer is yes, that's a fail. Because if you're going to badmouth somebody else, like a previous boss, then you're the type of person that will badmouth them if they hire you, okay? You'll be talking about them to other people behind their back, right? That's what you're demonstrating. That's the type of person you are. That's not the whole point of this question, but it's part of it. Okay, second thing you got to realize is that this information that they're probing for, it's actually none of their business. Do they have a right to know this? No. It's like saying, what is your credit card number? We need you to fill in this form. You need to put in your date of birth, your full name, and your credit card number. That's how we do this. So please fill it out. Right? Do they have a right to know your credit card number? No, they don't. Now they're pushing for it. And you can choose to reveal it to them if you wish. It's up to you. But are they entitled to it? No. That means if you're not comfortable in revealing it, you don't have to. I'm just saying this is what the situation is. Be aware of that, okay? Okay, we talked about you have to avoid bad-mouthing anyone, saying bad things about anyone or anything or any company. Okay, if you do that, you kind of fail this question. Okay. You want to be brief. We talked about that. You want to get off this question relatively quickly. Give them the answer that passes, and then get the hell off it so that you can spend your time in the interview selling yourself and saying how awesome you are, not avoiding landmines like this question. Okay, I think that's all the principles here. Okay, now let's talk about how you actually answer this. Okay, Let's pretend that you were laid off. Okay, that's actually what happened with your last job. You were laid off. Okay, saying that is okay. Okay, what you don't want to do is you don't want them to think that there's something wrong with you. Okay, now if you were laid off with like a bunch of other people at the same time, okay, it wasn't that, oh, you were laid off and only you, there was just you specifically. It's like, no. They were downsizing. They cut 10% of their workforce. What they did, the way they did this is they looked at the 10% of that were the most recent hires, and they just laid those people off. Or they looked at people in our department, say in the warehouse division or something, and they just laid off people in that department just in order of seniority, right? So the junior people were laid off, something like that. Like, if that was the case, I would say this because this serves to convince them that there's nothing wrong with you as an employee. They didn't lay you off because you were a bad employee. It wasn't for cause, okay? If you say anything that suggests that you had a performance issue or something like that, that's going to be perceived as a red flag. They're going to be thinking, okay, I see. You're not a good worker. Okay. Good that we know this, right? Because now we're going to eliminate you. Okay, so if you were laid off, you could say it. Anything you can say to demonstrate that, there wasn't any particular issue specific to you, I would say it. So I would say I was laid off as a group in a wave of layoffs that was, it affected 10% of the workforce, and it was purely done in terms of seniority, and I was one of the junior people, so that's what happened. Okay, now if you left your previous job, if you voluntarily resigned, you weren't let go, this was a conscious decision, you said, I'm giving you my notice, I'm moving on, I don't want to work here anymore. Okay, it's okay to mention that. It's not bad in itself, but once again, you have to add qualifying information to show that there's no red flags with you. Because if you say that you left, the question people are going to be wondering is, are you the type of person that leaves things very easily? If there's a little bit of a challenge, it's starting to get a little bit less fun than you thought it was, you leave. Right? Are you that type of person? Because if so, that's going to be a problem. If we hire you for this job, you might just decide it's not to your liking 3 months down the road and leave. And that makes us look like a bunch of idiots. We picked someone who just left after 3 months. That's going to be embarrassing for us. It's going to be bad for our company. We're going to have to do all this work all over again. So we don't want a person like that. So if you left, you have to justify it and explain this is why. And it's not going to be an issue if you were to hire me. Okay? Now, the way I would recommend people do this is by saying a very short catchphrase, okay, that sums the whole thing up. You say, no, I left. I was ready to do more. Okay? Now, if you want to keep going, you could say, you could qualify that. You'd say, like, I was in this role. I'd been in that role for many years. I felt that I'd really, covered it all. I knew the ins and outs of that role. I was comfortable with it. But there wasn't a lot of training opportunities. There wasn't a lot of promotion opportunities there. I was ready to do more. I was ready to move up and take on new responsibilities, especially responsibilities in this area, right? And that's why I'm coming here. This is what I want to do. I left that job because, it was good and I had no complaints with, the boss or the company or anything, but I'm ready to do more, specifically these types of responsibilities, and that's why I'm here now interviewing for this, because I would like to do this kind of role. Something like that. So if you could say that kind of thing, I would say it. If it doesn't make sense based on the job you had and the job you're now applying for, then obviously you can't say that. But the idea is you want to just leave it at that. I was ready to do more. You don't want them to ask you 10 follow-up questions probing about what specifically you want to do and why, right? That takes time away in the interview for stupid things. You want to get back to selling yourself. Okay. So to summarize, if you left, it's fine to say, I left. I voluntarily stepped away because I was simply ready to do more. There weren't a lot of opportunities to move forward at that job. I want to get into this area, and that's why I'm here now. Okay, now if you were fired from your previous job, okay, this is where it gets a bit tricky, as you can imagine, okay? Now, the problem is, there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, the reason why recruiters ask you about your past is not because they care about your past. There's nothing to do with them. What you did with some other company, who cares? There's nothing to do with them. But obviously, the reason why they're asking is because they're inferring that if you behaved a certain way in the past, then if they were to hire you, that's a good indication of how you're going to behave in the future, right? If they were to hire you and put you in this role, the way you would handle things is how you've handled them in the past, right? That's the assumption they're making. Now, we all know that that isn't universally true. A lot of times that isn't true. But more than 50% of the time, that tends to be how things work. So they're going to make that assumption, okay? Now, the problem is if you were fired, that suggests that, oh, you're the type of person that gets fired from jobs. And if we were to hire you for this job, there's a higher likelihood that you would need to be fired from this job for the same reasons, right? So that's the problem with saying you're fired, okay? Now, the conventional wisdom, what a lot of recruiters will recommend as an answer in this case, is they would love you to just tell all. They say, if you were fired, just admit you were fired, and then say what you learned from the experience and how you're moving on from there. This is what you learned, and it's not going to happen again, right? The problem with that advice is that it contradicts the entire cornerstone of recruitment theory in how you evaluate candidates. They believe past behavior predicts future behavior. So if you say you're fired, the implication is they're going to assume you're the type of person that gets fired, you're going to be a high-risk employee, and you lose. They will eliminate you because of that reason, now that they know it. They say they won't, but what we see quite often in the real world is they do, right? This is the danger with admitting you have a weakness or admitting something is not perfect in your past, and then talking about how you've learned what to do and how it'll never happen again. That's why there's a lot of problems with that in the real world, because a lot of recruiters don't have the discipline to take those kind of statements at face value. Instead, they interpret them as, oh, thank you for admitting that you suck at something. Now that we know you suck at something, we're going to eliminate you based on the fact that you suck at that. And if we hired you, you'll probably continue to suck at that. You like my highly professional terminology? Okay, so this is the problem. So for a start, I don't recommend that you freely admit that you were fired. You advance that information, especially when it's none of their business. I don't recommend you take the strategy of I'm going to admit I was fired, full disclosure, and then say what lesson I learned and how it's never going to happen again. Okay? Because that will be abused. That's my take on that. Don't do that. Okay? So, what can we do? Well, here's what I would say. Here's how I phrase it. Remember, this is not a deposition. Just because you're in this interview with these people doesn't mean that you're on trial, or that this is some kind of official thing where you could be guilty of perjury if you say something that isn't true. You know what I mean? These people are just they're trying to make it feel like that. They're trying to make it feel like you must tell them everything and reveal all, right? When you don't want to reveal things that make you look bad. Maybe you're an awesome person and you're a hard worker and you're a great employee, but in the past you had a jackass for a boss who exploited you. Admitting that you were fired by some insane psychopathic jackass should that preclude you from getting this job when you're a good worker? You'd be really good in the role? That's stupid. But that's the assumption these people are going to make because they're trying to get to know you without actually putting in the time to get to know you. They're just making assumptions based on stereotypes. So here's what I'd say. Don't admit you were fired if you were fired. Don't disclose that. Okay? Some people balk at that. They say, well, shouldn't I be truthful? Yeah, you should. But the problem is these people are going to make all kinds of assumptions about you, true or not, based on that statement. And they're all going to be bad. Okay? So I would recommend if you were fired, don't say you were fired. Instead, talk about the reason you were fired. Like, don't say this was the reason I was fired. Say this was an issue I had with that role. And then say you left. Because you did leave. That's how, to me, that justifies it. Now, if you got a different take on it, that's fine. But I would say, if I was in that position, I would say, well, here was the issue with my job. And a good template, if you can say this, I would say it this way. When I originally signed on for that job and I was hired for that job, the job description was for a certain role. Now, over time, I found that role evolved. It morphed into a completely different role. And I ended up in this different role, one that I had absolutely no interest in doing. And it didn't speak to my skills either. So that didn't work for me. So I left that organization. And what it did is it reiterated my passion for doing the original role. And that's why I'm here now. Because that speaks to my interest and my strengths. And that's why I'm here for this one. Something like that. Like if you could say that, if that's in any way accurate, or even partially accurate, I would phrase it like that. Okay? Now, if you had some other issue with the job, maybe it was with something else, but I would adapt that template to say, like, this was the issue, so I left, because that's not technically false, but it reinforced my interest in being in this situation, and that's why I'm here. So if you can do that, I would say that. And that's if you're fired, okay? Because you're really put on the spot with that question. They say, why did you leave? And you can't really admit the way, why you left or how you left, because the way recruiters are taught to think, and I know because I've taught recruiters in university, they're taught to regard that as a red flag. And it really counts against you. Okay, so this is this really weird tightrope that you have to walk, this minefield of a question. If you were laid off, no problem. Just say that. Say you were laid off as a group if you can. Communicate that there was nothing specifically wrong with you. If you left, that's fine too. You can say that. I left. As long as you qualify it by illustrating that you're not the type of person to just leave stuff at the drop of a hat. This was like a real special case, and it's a thing that won't happen again, because this job is the solution to the reason why you left. Something like that. Okay? But fired, that's where you got to tiptoe around it. That would be my recommendation for how to answer that question. Does that make sense? That's what I have to say about that.